Good afternoon, everyone. I'm really excited for everyone who's joined us today. My name is Corrine Taylor, and I'm Director of Federal Legislative Affairs here at We Act for Environmental Justice. We're excited today to host today's virtual town hall, Powering Change, New York's Models for Equitable Energy Policy. We Act has been a longtime advocate for equitable energy policies at New York City and New York State level. And today we plan to uplift some of these great solutions we've seen around the state as models for federal action. We intend for this conversation to be used in crafting policy priorities in the equitable energy space that will benefit all of New York and environmental justice communities across the nation. This includes trainings for green workforce, investing in community renewable energy, and increasing energy efficiency efforts. I will now introduce our moderator for today's event, Mr. Errol Lewis. Errol is a political anchor for Spectrum News NY1. He's the host of NY1's nightly program show, Inside New York City, Inside City Hall. Errol, thank you so much for moderating our town hall today on equitable energy policy.
Thank you so much for that introduction, and I want to thank everybody for participating today. There's a real important bunch of issues, of course, that we're going to get to today, and this is, of course, a key moment of opportunity as we get deeper into the current election season, which New Yorkers know will be immediately succeeded by a turnover of almost all of the citywide races, positions, including a new mayor. So this is a conversation that we could not avoid anyway, but we have a great opportunity to move the ball forward at the state, federal, and local level. With that, let me introduce our guests and we'll start our discussion right away. We're lucky to have with us today Congressman Paul Tonko of the 20th Congressional District, which is up in the Albany area. Congressman Tonko is chair of the Subcommittee on Environment and Climate Change for the House Energy and Commerce Committee. He's also a member of the House Natural Resources and Science Committees. Ms. Arlene Way is here. She is the Executive Director of Arbor Hill Development. They're based up in Albany. Max Levitzke is Director of the Green Workforce Training Program at SolarWinds, which is based here in New York, where I am, in Brooklyn. Nora Sherman is from the City University of New York's Institute for Urban Systems, specifically the Building Performance Lab, which is based in Manhattan and finds energy efficient ways to improve public buildings here in the city. Last but certainly not least, Cecil Corbin-Mark is the Deputy Executive Director of We Act for Environmental Justice, based in Northern Manhattan. And as Cecil knows, once upon a time, a little over 25 years ago, when I was doing a spell of community work outside of journalism, I served on the board of directors of the New York City Environmental Justice Alliance. I believe that's where we met, Cecil. These issues have been near and dear to my heart and very important for a long, long time, not just as a citizen, but back in my activist days. And of course, it happens to be the #1 story in the whole wide world right now. So even as a journalist, this is the place to be and the conversation to have, and I thank everybody for joining us for it. Folks, I want to start with energy efficiency. I want to start with you, Nora, and Cecil, and we'll bring the Congressman into the conversation as well. What's the relationship between energy efficient buildings and greenhouse gas emissions, Nora?
The relationship is direct. Especially in New York City, buildings account for about 3/4 of energy use. So if we're gonna tackle our carbon footprint, if we're gonna reach the goal of being a carbon neutral city by 2050, buildings are the be all and end all. And really energy efficiency within buildings starts with the—
I'm sorry, starts with?
The workers, the people who are running the building.
Uh-huh. And explain the connection.
So operations and maintenance can account for, making improvements in operations and maintenance in buildings can account for a 20% or up reduction in buildings energy use. We can do major retrofits, we can do major renewable installations on the, on solar on the rooftops, green roofs on the rooftops. If the people who run the buildings don't, first of all, run it at baseline, the highest performance level that they can. And if they don't understand the relationship between their actions and the energy use in their buildings, then we're never going to achieve the goals, or we're never going to even achieve the promises of renewables or major retrofits in buildings.
Is that as simple as turning off the lights and not running the air conditioner, or is there more to it than that?
It can be as simple as that, but you'd be surprised how complicated turning off the lights and not running the air conditioner can be. Even in this shutdown alone, having the building suddenly off can cause all kinds of problems that you might not expect. For example, mold might start growing. So having workers who understand how the systems work together and can address all of that enable us to, run it for better performance, which does include energy performance, but also can help buildings be healthier. We can make sure, we're sending our children back to school in buildings where we want to make sure there's a lot of air circulation. That also has to do with energy efficiency too, and programs that address energy frequently will also address these other kind of quality of life issues within buildings, quality of building issues.
In your experience, Nora, does getting building maintenance and efficiency workers up to the required standard, does it take a lot of training? Does it require directives from building owners? What's the best way to work on that piece of the puzzle?
The two really should come hand in hand. So we've been training New York City building workers for more than a decade, and we see the greatest success in terms of what they can achieve when their managers, when their owners are behind it, when it's not maybe just their unions that are encouraging them to get training, when they're actually empowered to enact the changes that we're teaching them how to do, and when it's clearly a part of either a corporate strategy or just a strategy within a portfolio. That's when we see real change. And that's really where policy comes in, because a lot of the owners and managers don't have the incentive to empower their workers unless they have some financial incentive. So that would be either a tax incentive to reduce carbon, a carrot or a stick, a carbon cap that might be approaching, which is the case here in New York City in 2024. Building owners will be facing steep fines if they don't reduce their carbon under a certain emission level.
Got it. So now, Cecil, let's bring EJ concerns into that conversation. How do we initiate that conversation with building owners in EJ communities?
Well, I think first and foremost, Errol, we want to initiate the conversation with the folks who live in buildings in EJ communities. When we talk about energy efficiency, what we're really talking about are pocketbook issues, wallet issues, however you want to characterize them, right? For us, this is an effort to really make sure that people in EJ communities can keep more money in their pockets. Our communities, sadly, because of the historical legacy of redlining, have some of the buildings that are the most energy efficient in the city, in the state, and in the country. And as a result of that disinvestment over many years, what is happening today is reality of the fact that when people spend in our communities for energy, when they pay their Con Edison bill or their energy bill, whoever that energy bill is coming from, because their homes are inefficient, it's costing more for them to actually power and provide the energy that's necessary. So even though the price per kilowatt on a Con Edison bill for a residential customer is the same across the entire city, if your home is energy inefficient, it's going to cost you more as a result. And that means there's an energy burden on communities of color in particular. And that's not just me saying that, that's studies documenting that as a fact. That energy burden means that if in some instances it can mean 2 to 3 times higher the cost, for example, of a household that may say live in a condo on the Upper East Side that's a more modern condo. And older homes, this is not just about the urban setting, it's also about rural communities as well, where we have houses that, as we say, they leak energy, and it takes more to heat them in the wintertime. And so they're spending more on their energy bills as well. And so then, yes, your question, Errol, was around talking to the owners as well. Well, when the city, WEACT advocated for a clean heat program many years ago. That's a program to actually change boilers from using the dirtiest oil to moving to cleaner fuels. And in that effort, we tried really hard to reach out to landlords. And one of the things I can tell you is, in some instances, mom and pop landlords, the smaller landlords, you know, they're doing their darndest to sort of keep things running and keep it moving. And oftentimes they'll tell you they don't have time to come to these meetings or these trainings and so forth. Then you have on the other side of that a scale where landlords are, you know, major holders of property across the city, and in some instances are really slumlords. And those folks don't show up to anything. They'll say, you know, send it to the management company, and then they'll direct the management company not to pay any attention to it. So how do we get in touch with landlords? We have to really make sure that the city is requiring that they focus on these directives, either by withholding sometimes their ability to get permits if they don't attend certain things or if they don't comply with certain things, or directly by fining them if they are not in compliance with laws like Local Law 97 or the Climate Mobilization Act. So that's how I would say.
At the local level, are lines of authority and responsibility fairly clear? Is this Department of Buildings for the most part, or does this start sprawling out into other agencies?
For the most part, it's Department of Buildings. You know, one of the things that we're eager to get more on is making sure that we really calculate some of the non-energy benefits. So as Nora was talking about, like, what are the health benefits that come from really doing energy efficiency improvements? Because we know that they do exist. We want them to be tracked so that the constituency of people that supports energy efficiency, as wonky as energy efficiency is, becomes greater, right? When people see that, oh, if we spend $1 on energy efficiency, it might help my kid with her or his or theirs asthma, you know, that I think becomes a real pathway to getting more people behind these policies.
Okay, let me bring the Congressman into the conversation. Congressman, conveniently enough, there are weatherization incentives that you've been working on. What is the status of that at the federal level, and does it require enhancement to maybe energize some of the folks that you've just heard about who are maybe lagging behind?
Sure. Well, you know, we talk about buildings being major contributors to the carbon pollution. And certainly in terms of great users of energy. So weatherization modifies a building so as to reduce energy consumption and optimizes energy efficiency, Errol. So I think we need to keep that in prime focus, front and center in our discussion, so that investments in weatherization in low-income communities with the highest energy burdens are one of the primary ways we'll increase resiliency, maximize energy efficiency, and begin our efforts to bring about response to what has been environmental injustice. So environmental justice reigns important for the work that we're doing with our climate legislation. It speaks to the fact also that, you know, this disproportionate amount of the bill, as was mentioned earlier, is what's paid by the low-income households. Some 7.2% of their income goes toward the cost of energy. Now, that is sometimes triple what you know, your higher scale household incomes would pay. And so right there, it's an opportunity for us to begin to address justice and fairness, and making certain that people live in environmental and energy acceptable environments. There's no one that should live in energy poor, environment poor surroundings. So it's our effort to make certain that we revamp weatherization. We've encouraged some good legislation to come about that was passed last week in the House. We're very proud of those efforts to provide for modifications, not only reauthorizing, but improving our weatherization program so as to, again, provide for opportunities for households and for buildings.
Broadly speaking, Congressman, is there a link being made in Congress between the energy efficiency and weatherization issues you just described and climate change more generally?
Oh, absolutely. I believe that it will be a top priority at our next Congress. You know that Speaker Pelosi appointed a select committee that did an overall that addresses the economy-wide opportunities for decarbonization. And my subcommittee that I chair, the Environment and Climate Change Subcommittee, will be front and center in addressing that. So I think what you'll have here is an effort by the House to move forward in the first 100 days to have some very sound action and activity. Certainly if I had my way, that would be the case, but I think our leadership is there. So if we move on a major ambitious bill that not only advances our climate and clean energy goals, but also jumpstarts our economy and modernizes our infrastructure, it's a way for us to develop a top priority for the first 100 days of the next administration for issues like this. But this will only be possible if we get a good outcome, a change in leadership in the White House and Senate in November. We know that from all the proposed Democratic plans that we need a multi-trillion, with a T, trillion-dollar investment to reduce pollution and increase resilience at the scale that climate science demands of us. So I see a great opportunity for us to include weatherization in a package like that, where we really invest in America, invest in our households, and speak boldly about the issue of environmental justice.
Okay, and so now, Cecil, what role can grassroots organizations play in helping to drive this conversation, whether it's in the first 100 days of the next Congress or the run-up to it or the period after that?
Well, Errol, I think that grassroots organizations have to be ready with a policy agenda, literally on day one for a new administration. We have to be prepared to advocate for that policy agenda and keep the feet of the elected officials to come into office, coming into 2021 to the fire. The same way that we got the Climate Leadership Community Protection Act, WE Act, and other organizations were in the fight for that. It does not come easy, but we were clear about the goals that we wanted to set. The Climate Leadership Community Protection Act has incredibly strong goals and really makes sure at the state level that environmental justice communities, or at least as it says in the act, disadvantaged communities, are really focused on as we make our transition to cleaner energy. I think the same level of tenacity and focus has to happen at the federal level. I think that it's similar to what we engaged in a fight around Local Law 97 as well. And this can be done. We've proven it now, especially with environmental justice organizations in the lead of those fights. The Climate Leadership Community Protection Act was a multi-front fight. But there's no doubt about it that environmental justice organizations were the one in the lead. And similarly, in the Local Law 97 effort, we really protected communities, vulnerable communities, from really the face of facing gentrification and eviction from their homes. Because if we're not focused on how to protect folks in those communities, a good climate law could have very devastating. And so being clear about what our goals are, really advocating for that, making sure that we keep the feet to the fire, and not just being satisfied when a law is passed, but staying in that fight when it comes time to developing the regulations. That's a key issue for people. You know, we think we give up when, oh, okay, victory has won when some executive signs a bill. That's really just the beginning of it. It really requires us really staying in the fight until the regulations and the policies are enacted, and then making sure that the benefits are delivered to those communities. So it's as President Obama said, being a citizen activist is sort of the most important key role in our democracy.
Okay, fair enough. In fact, on that note, I want to bring Arlene Way in, and let's go beyond talking about weatherization and not having excessive burdens on low-income communities and having waste and dealing with efficiency in buildings to renewables and how that figures into this. This is something that gets talked about a lot in New York. I'm sure it's working better outside of the city because I've seen not much progress here in the city. But Arlene, if you can talk to us a little bit about how best practices that you've seen can help with the development of affordable housing?
Well, I'm going to share honestly that this continues to be a struggle for everybody, and it's a matter of equity and access. It works well when we're able to make solar and other opportunities available to the people. But this is a problem in terms of accessibility and availability of opportunities and affordability of these opportunities. So I know the city of Albany has just joined an alliance with 13 other cities within the Capital District region to automatically make solar available to widely as many people as possible by engaging with solar farms, which can not only help homeowners, but also help people who are renting in apartments. But again, it's an equity issue. So on one hand, they will have the opportunity of some people, homeowners, will have the opportunity of acquiring rooftop installments, right? And going through that particular program, there are incentives, there are tax incentives, and homeowners can immediately see benefits, direct benefits, to reduction in costs for them. The problem is that for low-income people, they're probably going to have challenges with regard to installing solar on the roofs, because I know, like, for example, in the community that I serve, the buildings are so old, they can't sustain the weight of solar panels on the building. Or in communities that I serve, we have so many trees, which I love trees, but you can't have trees and access to the sun. So I don't know how you work the math on that. But what we're finding is that in the very low income community, we have less opportunity to access rooftop installments and those incentives. Now the solar farms, which we're looking to connect with, because they seem to work better with communities like mine that cannot manage the rooftop installments, and we don't want to get rid of our trees, right? So we can do the farming, and there's no installation that we need to be worried about. But the people who participate in that program do not share in the same kinds of savings that they would if they could have the rooftop installments. So I think that this is an issue that we need to look at in terms of the incentives. And I think that landlords in these instances in low-income communities, you're talking more about more tenants being affected by this. There needs to be some incentive for them to be able to participate on a wider level. So that's a whole nother conversation. But there are opportunities. Everything that we can do to reduce the burden of energy on low-income households is going to be critical, because these burdens are factors in people losing their homes and their apartments. They can't stay places where they can't afford the utilities. They can't, and they leave, which creates a whole nother problem for us in terms of vacant buildings. If you can't stay in a place because you can't afford the utilities, you leave, and there we are with another vacant building. Sure. You know, okay. So there's a lot to look at and consider with regard to this.
So now, Congressman, from what you've seen, both in, I guess, in your district up there, but from what you're hearing in Washington, what are the opportunities as far as community solar in particular becoming sort of a national model?
Well, you know, I think basically, Errol, we have always seen weatherization as a critical piece of the puzzle. It's important for us, especially in this whole struggle, within the struggle of COVID-19, where people are unemployed and where they're spending a lot more time in their homes. We need to make certain that we increase funding for this program. That's absolutely essential. And we also need to grow recognition of the need to center equity in our clean energy policy. The Weatherization program is the biggest federal program focused on delivering efficiency service to low-income households. So just reauthorizing it wouldn't be enough. We need to make certain we improve and reauthorize. So to begin with, we authorize more funding, and then we modernize the definition of weatherization in a bill that I have authored that became part of the energy package that passed last week in the House. So what it does is modernize the definition of weatherization materials to include renewable energy technologies and other advanced technologies, which would make it easier for local providers to incorporate these technologies into their work. I think that's so important to the recipients of this program. We also allow re-weatherization of homes 15 years after past weatherization services. Here to, before this change, if you got that weatherization assistance, then you were considered addressed and done and paid for. Now we have a provision that will allow for you to return after 15 years to see if your house is eligible for any additional improvements. And we need to look at, like, as Arlene mentioned in her comments, the structural integrity of roofs that are part of the program. Enabling for improvements of that kind, and to see them, include them as weatherization aspects, I think is very, very important. So we do the refunding, we enhance the funding. We think it's important to increase the amount of investment that we make here. And we create a small competitive grant program to support innovative weatherization practices, which can include pre-weatherization work, that roof repair that I talked about, and mold remediation, as well as new and emerging practices. So these are important improvements to the program, but there's much more that we can and need to do, especially to ensure more rental and multifamily housing units are enabled to participate in the program. So we see many landlords today that don't see a reason to improve the efficiency of their tenants' homes. We must figure out a way to deliver more services to everyone, and to, again, modernize that effort with new technology, with greening up, with renewables, and certainly with ancillary pieces like, the improvements of roofing and the like in a home.
Okay. Before I shift the conversation into workforce development, I want to remind all participants that on the lower right, if you go down to the bottom tier on your Zoom screen, over to the right, there's a Q&A button. And you can click on that and begin adding questions. We're going to collect a lot of them there and through the chat for the last 20 odd minutes of our program. But if you're hearing something, I know there's a lot of different terms and programs being thrown around. You can just click on the Q&A button and jot down your question now. Let me turn now to workforce development. Max, tell us how SolarWinds is going, what workforce development looks like as we move toward more green-collar jobs as they become available, what you found, and how we can expand what's working well.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Errol. So I'd like to explain SolarWinds' model really quick, because I think it stands for a chance of replication and success in other parts of the state and across the country. So SolarWinds, our workforce team, our core focus is to deliver hard skills technical training with a broad focus on sustainability and energy efficiency. But our content really covers what we call transferable skill sets. So these are things that we define as green construction and building operations and maintenance, like Nora talked about at the beginning of the webinar. And then also more targeted paths such as solar installation. But the transferable skills are really important because we don't want to pigeonhole someone into a career that is as specific as a solar installer. When it is still a volatile industry, it does have ups and downs in employment, even though it's growing year over year. So by touching on these transferable skills, we're able to kind of expand the broader definition of what a green job is or what energy efficiency a job looks like. So kind of helping people understand that it isn't this one specific task that is installing solar panels, I think kind of opens the door for discussion and really makes people think like how they can incorporate this in their work and their job and not just a very specific job or career path. So another really important part of SolarOne, we really rely heavily on a partnership model. So our organization acts as a midpoint that provides this hard skills training for other workforce partners, such as We Act in Harlem, so they can focus on their core competencies, such as, you know, recruitment, connecting with the community, counseling and case management for folks, resume building, interview preparation, things like that. It allows people to focus on their core competencies and have everyone perform to the best of their abilities. So students come to SolarOne for this hard skills training, anywhere from 1 to 6 weeks at a time, also allowing certification opportunities to build out their resume and open more doors for them. And then following this training completion, we collaborate with our workforce partners to place people in jobs across the city. And, you know, collaboration with these partners is crucial because these programs provide opportunities to a lot of individuals who have encountered roadblocks in their search for fair wage jobs. So that could include folks with previous criminal justice involvement, people who have experienced homelessness, people who have a history of substance abuse, veterans, disconnected youth. The list really goes on. So by opening these opportunities and creating a wide range of access to people who need it most, I think that's where we're really going to see both an improvement in, you know, these lofty energy efficiency and climate goals, as well as connecting the communities that are going to do that work and empower them to be part of that future.
And Max, I mean, something basic to every job training program I've ever seen is just getting folks through the program, right? Whether it's, you know, car fare or, you know, lunch, the ability to start making a living almost immediately because the need is that great. Where are the holes there that we can fill as this opportunity continues to expand?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. I mean, it's hard enough for a lot of us to work 40 hours a week, but if you have some of those problems or, you know, issues from your past, as I mentioned a minute or two ago, it makes all of that so much more difficult. And if you're taking yourself away from an employment opportunity to then spend, you know, multiple weeks in a training program, it's just the math doesn't add up sometimes. So, you know, I think we really need to incentivize these types of training programs on a state level, on a federal level. You know, we talk about the Green New Deal and the expansion of energy and removing fossil fuels, but within that, there really needs to be a focus on the workforce development piece. We need to fund things like wage subsidies, employer-backed training programs, so we can kind of complete a closed-loop model to where we have employers on board who are dedicated to bringing students on afterward and providing the students with the means they need to go through these programs. So funding things, you know, in New York, funding things like a Metro card, funding things like meal money for each day, you know, things a lot of us take for granted, but that are really going to help people show up and then complete and finish what they started so that they set themselves up for success in the future.
And Cecil, what has your experience been partnering with SolarOne?
It's been really amazing, Errol, and I want to give a large props to SolarOne for their efforts. Through SolarOne's partnership, We Act has been able to advance a campaign that we called our Solar Uptown Now. If you didn't catch that, that was Solar Uptown Now, S-U-N. Anyway, through that program, we've been able to train more than 100 workers and we've been able to actually put solar panels up on 14 HDFCs across the Northern Manhattan area. We've put in more than 400,000 kilowatts of solar, and we've been able to help, from our count, at least more than 900 residents. We're trying to make sure that they get savings. The solar that we put up on their buildings really takes some of the load of their particular common area charges, which are some of the most expensive charges. We focused on HDFCs because those are low to moderate income cooperatives across the city. They form part of the backbone of the affordable housing stock. And by helping them lower their second highest charges and cost, meaning their energy, we're able to make sure that those homes stay affordable. We are hoping to also take a bite out of the climate crisis by reducing almost 3,000 tons of greenhouse gas annually. And so we're clear that this partnership has been rich and has benefited not only us by training people in the local Northern Manhattan community, being able to see them put solar panels up on roofs in their buildings that they can point to, giving them a leg into the green new economy. Out of this initiative, we've also taken some of our trainees that have gone through the SolarWinds training program, and we've worked with them to create something called Solar Uptown Now Services, or SUNS, which is a worker-owned cooperative. We train them through the Green Worker Cooperative in the Bronx, and that has given them an opportunity to really become part of the ownership piece of the green new economy and really allow them in the future to create wealth, right? This is a wealth building entity that we've just incubated in our community, totally by people from our community, with the support of things like Green Worker Cooperative and the training they've received from Solar Uptown Now. And so we're working with the SUNS Cooperative to get them more jobs. They're going to become registered as minority business enterprises here in the state of New York. And we're looking forward to getting them, more work into the future. So if there are solar projects out there, check out SUNS, go to the WEACT website, and you can connect with us and we'll get some more information there. But that's been the benefit of the partnership on the ground locally, and we're really excited about it. In terms of federally, we're hoping that, not only to what Max said about some of the issues in terms of resources that are needed, childcare is another important one as well. We want to encourage more women to come into the industry, and not that only childcare is women's responsibility, it's all parents' responsibility, to be clear, but we do know that that is a barrier for some of the women entering the space. And we know it's a barrier for some of the men who are parents as well. And so we want to make sure that those aren't barriers. The other barrier that I think that's also important, WEACT has a long history of working with unions. And one of the things that relationship taught us is that we need to be able to provide resources for people to enter the union shop, if you will, which means you need a union card. And so federal funding and grants might consider creating resources to do exactly that and help us eliminate that as a hurdle so they can actually go to the union hall, get union jobs, et cetera, once we've provided them with the training. So those are some things that we think about. And again, amazing partnership with SolarOne, as well as support from the governor's office and the mayor's office and other partner you have as well.
Okay, and Nora, when it comes to training people and getting them up to speed and connected with this emerging industry, with these emerging industries, there should be a role, I would think, for some part of the university system, right?
Yes. Our training comes in two forms. We have had an internship program since 2007, and interns are paid. They come from all different types of degree programs in CUNY. So that's associate degree programs, bachelor and master's. And they get real experience plus training. We offer them a 3-day intensive training on energy topics and buildings. I found this to be a really key way to, especially within a public university system, to reach out to students who might not know where they can. It gives them a place to start on their career pathway, and we give them, as I said, paid real work. So there's no barrier to entry in terms of not being able to work for free during college. And then we also provide training for incumbent workers, which we touched on a bit before, but that's the operation and maintenance training. We also partner with other organizations to offer all kinds of training that kind of address all issues within the buildings in the city. So I think that especially as a public university, we owe it to the students to provide them with pathways into the career, and we owe it to the incumbent workers to give them the skills to run their buildings better.
Okay.
Errol, Errol?
Yes.
If I might, is from the federal perspective, in recent years, the program has received about $300 million annually. And there's no doubt in my mind that this will have to be scaled up over the next several years to help a lot more people. If we're going to train people, if we're going to have that workforce ready to do this work, we need to commit to a sustained federal investment over the course of several years. Let me just remind everyone that during the Great Recession, when President Obama assumed office, he was handed a tough economy. And the 2009 Recovery Act, the ARA Act, included some $5 billion for weatherization. Now, with that money, we were able to improve nearly 1 million homes, which was phenomenal. Again, the average is about $283 per year of savings on the utility bill. So that was a big assistance, and it helped reduce carbon pollution, obviously. But after that, the historic investment that it was dropped. That $5 billion dropped significantly. It dropped off considerably, and a lot of new hires were let go. That's why we need to commit to a large-scale, sustained federal investment in improving low-income housing stock. And ultimately, it's good for efficiency, but also for the health and the safety and the resilience of these buildings. And it's just good in setting a tone for what needs to be done coast to coast to assist our households and really go full speed, boldly, to fight the environmental injustice issue out there.
Are those the kind of funds, Congressman, that have to be reauthorized every year? Is that, kind of a rolling fight? Because it strikes me as the kind of capital investment that almost by definition should be done on a multi-year basis.
Yeah, well, like our energy bill, we'll look at it with weatherization, reauthorization, right? So you do get a ban, a time ban there. But it needs to be expressed. The worst thing here is to get long-term commitment. And I think we need to do that. We need to plan in a way that, yes, reauthorizes and refunds over a series of bans, but even some of the tax incentives don't go out far enough into the future. And so I think we need to be serious about this so as to high prioritize these given situations, these investments, which really improve the environment for all of us, and really speaks significantly to the wedge of the pie that is energy costs for that low-income household budget. It's far greater a wedge of the pie than it is for those in more affluent settings. And we ought to be sensitive to that if we're going to fight the battle for environmental justice.
Okay. Well, I want to remind audience members again, you have a Q&A button at the bottom right of your Zoom screen. And we've got a number of questions that are up here, and we're going to spend the remainder of our time bringing out some of those for discussion. So this first one is from James, and it's a factual question. I think the Congressman might be able to answer it. Some of the modernization effort, by that I think he means some of the legislation you've described so far, was achieved during the Obama years. Since then, what has happened?
Well, there was a huge investment, and then Congress changed. The leadership in Congress changed. And some of these issues were, quite frankly, not the priority. There were investments in all sorts of infrastructure, including energy infrastructure, that was taking us towards this decarbonization model that was economy-wide. We have languished for a couple of years. When I was ranker on the subcommittee, not chair, I was in the minority. And we pushed a lot of efforts to really put together the planning and the focus. And that developed 9 basic principles that will guide us in establishing climate legislation. But now that we're in the majority, we're able to begin with, meeting with hearings, running hearings. There weren't hearings scheduled for a long span of time on climate at all. And so now we're having those hearings. We're bringing in the stakeholders. We're having the roundtable discussions. They're helping us build what is, a science-based package that will wean us off of reliances on fossil fuels, but really take us to a green economy. And that needs to be done with science in mind and with a significant sense of planning. But those 9 principles that were unveiled in Baltimore at a national discussion on climate are those principles that guide us. And we were helped by the stakeholders and their input in developing that. But again, to your point, it requires, to keep it a priority, it requires a sort of commitment and the majority that will address this. I'm hoping that with a presidential change, because let's face it, we have someone in the White House that simply doesn't believe in the concept of climate change. And so you're not getting that emphasis, that prioritization. You have someone that has been comfortable in giving the wealthy and giant corporations tax relief, but not bringing it down to the lower income strata. So we need a breath of fresh air that will prioritize significantly well these programs and then follow those actions up with investment in the federal budgets that will get us to this achievement of bringing justice, environmental justice to people, bringing down, decarbonizing across our economy, and allowing people to have the benefit of jobs that are created in their neighborhoods that will know the culture of those neighborhoods and have the people trained to go to work on investing and implementing these innovative concepts. Okay.
Our next question comes from Neil, and there are a number of you can answer this, so feel free to jump in, all panelists. The question is, what are the barriers to community distributed generation projects that can be alleviated most readily? We talked a little bit about community solar earlier.
Well, I'll start, Errol, and I'll just say that, yes, one of the things that WEACT is engaged in, again, with Solar One right now is to really use the opportunity to bring solar to particularly affordable housing by making sure that folks can get access to a community shared solar array. So we're partnering with the New York City Housing Authority to train residents in New York City Housing Authority buildings to put solar arrays up on their buildings, and then partnering with other people in affordable housing to take shares out of those solar arrays so that there is a greater sense of access for renewable solar energy. So that's one way in which we can begin to put out or break down some of the barriers for distributed generation. I think the other thing about an initiative like that is that it really helps us begin to try to chip away at the stereotype of what housing is in our communities and use it as an opportunity to sort of pivot to really recognizing that public housing can be a resource for our communities. And so I share that with folks as something that we're doing right now in partnership with Solar One and with Con Edison, and actually with the Brooklyn Movement Center, something that Errol would be familiar with.
My buddies, yeah.
Your buddies, indeed. But I think other things are out there for us to sort of tackle this question as well, really locating sort of battery storage in communities, really taking opportunities to advance the ability to connect communities to advanced solar power by actually creating storage so that we're not totally dependent upon sort of the immediate sort of transmission of power from the solar cells themselves. So I'll let others jump in there too.
I have one thing I'd like to add to Cecil's point. Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead, Congressman.
No, go ahead, because you.
Just really quick, so in just building out this example you talked about of our ongoing partnership between WEACT and Solar One, I think we need to, I mentioned this earlier, this closed loop model. We need to incentivize employers that organizations like Solar One and WEACT work with. In this instance, the opportunity to do these solar installations was bid out, and installers were selected on their willingness to hire folks from the training program and the numbers of people that they were hired. And this model works. Solar One has done it multiple times now, multiple different projects. And if we can build that up and tie it into legislative action that funds similar employers that are willing to hire people who need the jobs most, I think we're going to see a lot of that change start to snowball more and also keep the jobs in the community.
And I think also the investment in distributed generation, in research for battery development so that we can have longer term storage, relieves pressure on the transmission system. But we also need grid modernization if we're going to be able to bring power into these areas, clean power into the areas that require it, but perhaps may not produce it. So there's just a lot of effort that's required through planning. and through science-based assessments. Because if we do not do this with science in mind, we could put undue pressure onto the budgets of low-income communities because we haven't managed this well. There are issues of capacity and reliability and resilience that need to be strictly paid attention to. But again, if we can bring some of these innovative concepts into all neighborhoods, and especially addressing environmental justice, then we'll accomplish the goals of our comprehensive legislation and be in sync with the 9 principles that we introduced on behalf of our climate comprehensive plan.
Okay, I've got a question here from Lewis. It's, I'll just read it. Public policy question. Because new and larger residential buildings, if properly constructed, will be substantially greener than older buildings, should the city and state be promoting building replacements? And if so, would such a replacement policy conflict with the public desire to promote historic districts? Furthermore, if you're going to replace older buildings, how would you restrain the move to gentrification? So it's kind of a textured question, but the issue is, what do you do with older buildings if it's easier to make newer residential ones greener? Go ahead, Arlene. Unmute yourself. Arlene, push unmute. Yeah,
Okay,
there you go.
I did. There will always be opportunities to build new and to create new buildings that are going to be greener, and you know, that's always going to come. But our historic buildings are treasures that need to be protected. So I think this is where weatherization comes in, and doing what we can do with the new technologies to support those older treasures. And this gets back to communities farming, where we can embrace it all. But let's not tear down the treasures.
I'm with Arlene on that as a former chair of my community board's Landmarks Preservation Committee. You know, we know that there is the ability to actually make those older buildings quite energy efficient and weatherization. And, you know, they are part of the fabric of our communities, and they also represent sort of sense memory for people in our communities as well. They become touchstones of where you may have had your first kiss, or your first class, or your first music lesson, or your first place to play ball or something like that. And so, you know, we can't just sort of rip out parts of our ecosystem just because they're older. They are treasures, and we need to recognize them as such and do all that we can to save them.
Well said. I've got a question for Congressman Tonko. It says, a transition to renewable energy by definition requires that we move off of fossil fuels. The science is very clear. We must do so rapidly or risk climate catastrophe. Do you support a national ban on fracking, a ban on new fossil fuel infrastructure, pipelines and power plants that transport and burn fracked oil and gas, and a ban on fossil fuel exports?
Well, I think we need to do it in context of a plan that is science-based. There's, you know, an important aspect to all of this. As we decarbonize, we don't want a negative impact on the households that are low-income strata. And we need to maintain a capacity base. I think there are aggressive goals. We have very robust goals that are science-based. We're working in that transition phase that's across the entire economy so that everyone contributes. But it needs to be done with resilience and capacity in mind, because we will create catastrophe for our low-income households if we don't do this correctly. But I say let's do it with robust goals in mind, as quickly as possible, with a plan that's science-based.
Do you think this, I mean, I guess I guess what the questioner was really getting at is, does the science lead you to conclude that an absolute shutoff on, say, new fossil fuel infrastructure and or hydrofracking is warranted at this point?
We will do what I think is embrace the robust goals and underpin it with science, so that if that instructs us, we move as quickly as possible. And I think we have robust goals in our climate agenda, in our comprehensive climate legislation, the Clean Future Act, and that is done with science-based goals in mind. And I think that we will see as aggressive a pace as science will dictate.
Okay. Folks, that brings us to the end of this portion of the program. I want to thank all of the panelists for a great discussion. Let me turn things back over to Corinne.
Awesome. This was such a really engaging conversation. I was following the chat and I just saw so many really insightful questions. I want to first thank all of our panelists, Arlene, Cecil, Nora, Max, thank you for your expertise. Congressman Tonko, thank you for your leadership in the House, and we really look forward to working with you more in the 117th Congress. But most importantly, Errol Lewis, thank you so much for moderating today. We really appreciate your insight and your ability to move the conversation.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And so we want to say to everyone, we're really excited about not only what was discussed here, but the value and the importance of engaging communities in conversations about energy efficiency, job creation, and also making sure that when we think about the green economy, that we're making sure that communities can be a part of those decisions. A lot of what was discussed here will also be included in our very own Green Jobs Report that's coming out in October, and we'll make sure to include and follow up with everyone that was on our discussion here today about that. So please stay in touch with us. Please follow us at We Act for EJ on both Twitter and Instagram. And as mentioned before, in the next coming weeks, we'll be releasing our very own Green Jobs Report that uplifts community solutions and the opportunities that are very present and need more community involvement in terms of addressing our decision to really push for more green jobs and community involvement. So thank you so much for everyone who joined. It was really engaging, and please stay in touch. Have a great day and stay safe.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Take care. Thanks again, Errol.
Thank you.
Thank you, Arlene.